The cold October wind bit through Mike Sullivan's worn jacket as he stood at the back of the small crowd gathered for the marina auction. His weathered hands clutched a crumpled $500 bill, the last of his savings. The auctioneer's voice carried across the harbor, competing with the clanging of halyards against masts and the persistent cry of seagulls. Behind the auctioneer sat the sorry sight that had drawn Mike here, a dilapidated houseboat, listing badly to one side, its white hull stained brown and green with rust and algae. At 34, Mike looked older than his years. His face, once boyishly handsome, had been weathered by salt spray and etched with worry lines that had deepened considerably since his divorce 6 months earlier. The sea had always been Mike's life, but lately it felt like it was drowning him. His small fishing business, Sullivan's Catch, once provided a modest but comfortable living. Now it barely covered the fuel for his aging fishing boat, the Olivia Marie, named after his 8-year-old daughter. The divorce had gutted him financially and emotionally. Rebecca's lawyer had painted Mike as an unstable provider, pointing to his fluctuating income and long hours on the water. The judge had been sympathetic but practical, awarding Rebecca their suburban home and primary custody of Olivia. Mike was left with weekend visitations mounting legal bills and a cramped one-bedroom apartment above Pelican Harbor's bait shop that perpetually smelled of fish and failure. Now he lived for the weekends when Olivia would stay with him, her bright smile the only light in his increasingly dark world. But even those precious moments were tainted. He'd seen the way Olivia's eyes had dimmed when she first saw his tiny apartment, how she tried to hide her disappointment. She deserved better, and Mike was determined to give it to her somehow. The auctioneer's voice cut through Mike's thoughts. Lot number 12, the second wind. This beautiful floating home offers unlimited potential for the right buyer. Built in 1969, she's got good bones and plenty of character. Perfect for someone looking to live the waterfront lifestyle on a budget. The crowd chuckled at the optimistic description. Someone behind Mike muttered that it was more like perfect for someone with a death wish. Another voice added that the thing would sink before anyone could get it out of the marina. But as Mike stared at the derelict vessel, his mind raced with possibilities. The cramped apartment was depressing and offered little space for a growing 8-year-old. If he could make this houseboat livable, it would solve his housing problem and give him the waterfront access he needed for his fishing business. The bidding started at $1,000, but no hands went up. The auctioneer dropped it to $750, then $500. Still no takers. Mike felt his heart pounding as he looked at the crumpled bill in his pocket. $500 was almost everything he had, but Olivia's face flashed in his mind, her disappointment when she saw where her father now lived, her brave smile trying to hide it. "Do I hear 500? The auctioneer called out, scanning the crowd with increasingly desperate eyes. Mike's hand trembled as he raised it. The crowd turned to look at him, and he heard someone whisper, "Is Mike Sullivan actually bidding on that floating coffin?" The auctioneer's face lit up with relief. "I have 500 from the gentleman in the blue jacket. Do I hear 550? Silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Mike held his breath, part of him hoping someone would outbid him and save him from what was probably a terrible mistake. But no other hands went up. Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in blue for $500. A smattering of applause rippled through the crowd, more mocking than congratulatory. Mike felt a mixture of excitement and terror wash over him. He had just purchased a floating home with his last $500 vessel that looked like it might not survive the next storm. The other fishermen were already making jokes about Sullivan's floating coffin and placing bets on how long it would take for the Coast Guard to declare it a navigation hazard. Jackson Miller, the harbor master, approached Mike with the paperwork, his weathered face showing both sympathy and concern. "You sure about this?" "Mike?" The old man's voice was gruff but kind. "That boat's been sitting here for 8 years. Previous owner died and his family couldn't afford the storage fees. She's going to need a lot of work." Mike nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "I can handle it. I've worked on boats my whole life." Jackson studied Mike's face for a moment, then handed him a thick folder along with the ownership papers. "Well, she's yours now. You've got 30 days to get her seaworthy or move her out of my marina. And Mike," he lowered his voice, "be careful when you go aboard. I haven't been inside her in years, but last time I checked, the floor was getting pretty soft in places." Mike spent the rest of that day walking around his new purchase, making mental notes of everything that needed repair. The list was daunting. The hull needed patching in several places. The roof required significant work. The electrical system was almost certainly shot, and the plumbing was questionable at best. But underneath the decay and neglect, Mike could see the boat's potential. The second win was larger than he had initially thought, with a spacious main living area, a small galley kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and even a tiny bathroom with a shower. With some work, it could become a comfortable home for him and a weekend paradise for Olivia. His daughter would love having her own room that looked out over the water, a major upgrade from the pull-out sofa in his apartment. That evening, Mike called Olivia to tell her about his purchase. His daughter's excitement was infectious as he described their future floating home. "Daddy, we're going to live on a boat like pirates." The pure joy in her voice made Mike's chest tighten. The next morning, Mike arrived at the marina before dawn, armed with a toolbox, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee. He had barely slept, his mind racing with plans and concerns about his impulsive purchase. The houseboat looked even more decrepit in the gray pre-dawn light, sitting low and tilted slightly to one side. Mike took a deep breath and stepped aboard, feeling the deck give slightly under his weight. The door to the main cabin was swollen with moisture and required significant effort to open. When it finally gave way, Mike was hit with the musty smell of mold and decay. His flashlight beam revealed an interior that was both better and worse than he had expected. The furniture was ruined by years of moisture, but the basic structure seemed sound. Water stains on the walls showed that the roof had leaked extensively, but much of the damage appeared to be cosmetic. As the sun rose over Pelican Harbor, Mike began a systematic assessment of the second wind. He crawled into the cramped engine compartment and found the inboard motor in surprisingly decent condition, just needing cleaning and some new parts. The hull had several small leaks, but nothing catastrophic. The roof would need complete replacement in the electrical system. Mike's heart sank as he opened the main electrical panel. The wiring was a nightmare: corroded connections, improperly spliced wires, and what appeared to be several amateur modifications over the years. It was far beyond his expertise, a genuine fire hazard that would need professional attention. The cost of rewiring the entire boat would eat into his meager savings, but there was no avoiding it. One spark in the wrong place could turn the second wind into a floating inferno. By midday, Mike had compiled a comprehensive list of repairs and their approximate costs. The total was staggering, far more than he had anticipated. Even doing most of the work himself, he would need at least $3,000 for materials and specialized labor money he simply didn't have. He sat on the deck staring out at the harbor, wondering if he had made a catastrophic mistake. The sound of footsteps on the dock pulled Mike from his thoughts. Tony Rodriguez, a local electrician who occasionally worked on fishing boats, stood looking up at the second wind with undisguised skepticism. "So this is the Sullivan yacht I've been hearing about." Tony's voice held amusement, but no malice. "Gotta say, Mike, when people said you bought a floating disaster, I thought they were exaggerating." Mike managed a tired smile. "It has potential. Just needs some work." Tony stepped aboard the deck, creaking under his weight. "Mind if I take a look? I've got an hour before my next job." For the next 45 minutes, Tony examined the boat's electrical system, occasionally whistling or muttering under his breath. Finally, he closed the electrical panel and turned to Mike with a grave expression. "Mike, this is a fire hazard waiting to happen. Half these wires aren't even properly connected, and the other half are using the wrong gauge for their load. You're lucky this thing hasn't burned down already." Mike's heart sank. How much to fix it? Tony ran a hand through his hair, calculating. For a complete rewire, and at least $1,500 in materials plus labor. "But," Tony hesitated, "if you help me and we do it over a few weekends, I could do it for the cost of materials, plus a couple of fresh catches when fishing picks up." Mike looked at his friend in surprise. "Tony, I can't ask you to do that." Tony shrugged. "You're not asking, I'm offering. Besides, Rebecca told Lisa about the divorce settlement. That was rough, man." Tony's wife Lisa and Rebecca had been friends before the divorce, giving Tony an inside perspective on Mike's situation. The two men spent the afternoon creating a repair plan, prioritizing the most critical issues. Tony would handle the electrical system. Mike would focus on the structural repairs and plumbing. With luck and good weather, they might have the boat minimally habitable within a month. As days passed, Mike developed a grueling routine. He would rise before dawn, grab coffee and a quick breakfast, then head to the harbor to work on the boat. By mid-morning, he would leave to take the Olivia Marie out for a few hours of fishing, selling his modest catch to local restaurants. After a quick lunch, he would return to the second wind, working until it was too dark to see. His hands, already calloused from years of fishing, developed new cuts and scrapes from handling rusty metal and splintered wood. But with each repair, the houseboat looked a little less like a derelict and a little more like a home. The hull repairs proved challenging, but manageable. Using marine putty and fiberglass patches, Mike sealed the worst of the leaks. It was tedious work that required him to spend hours in cramped spaces beneath the waterline. But gradually he began to see progress. The boat still sat lower in the water than it should, but at least it wasn't actively sinking. The roof repairs were more challenging than the hull work. Mike had to remove layers of accumulated debris and failed patching attempts from previous years. Underneath, he discovered that the roof's basic structure was still sound, but several support beams had rotted and needed replacement. He spent an entire weekend at the lumberyard carefully selecting materials that would be both affordable and suitable for marine use. Working on the roof gave Mike a panoramic view of the harbor and the surrounding coastline. From up there, he could see the busy commercial fishing boats heading out for their morning runs, the weekend pleasure craft preparing for day trips, and the constant ballet of seagulls and pelicans hunting for fish. Despite the physical demands and financial uncertainty of his project, Mike found himself feeling more optimistic than he had in months. 2 weeks into the project, Olivia came for her scheduled weekend visit. Mike picked her up from Rebecca's house, enduring his ex-wife's pointed comments about his ridiculous boat project and concerns about their daughter's safety. Rebecca wasn't being deliberately cruel. Mike recognized genuine concern beneath her criticism. She had always been practical, preferring the security of their suburban home to the uncertainty of Mike's fishing business. Their fundamental difference in values had contributed to their marriage's dissolution, but Mike couldn't deny that Rebecca was a good mother who wanted the best for Olivia. Olivia, however, was thrilled to see the second wind up close. She climbed aboard with the fearlessness of childhood, exploring every corner and declaring it the coolest house ever. Mike showed Olivia the progress he had made and explained his plans for each room. Her bedroom would be in the smaller of the two sleeping areas with windows that looked out over the water. The main living space would serve as both living room and dining room, and Mike was planning to install a small television and maybe even a gaming system if his finances improved. Olivia listened with rapt attention, occasionally suggesting additions like a rope swing or a slide that would let her jump directly into the harbor. Her imagination transformed the shabby houseboat into a magical vessel full of adventure and possibility. Looking at the boat through her eyes, Mike felt renewed determination to make the second wind a home they could both be proud of. That weekend, Mike and Olivia worked together on smaller projects, painting walls and cleaning windows. Olivia proved to be an enthusiastic assistant, though her help sometimes created more work than it saved. Still, Mike treasured these moments of shared purpose, watching his daughter's face light up with pride as they completed each small task. When Rebecca came to pick Olivia up on Sunday evening, even she seemed grudgingly impressed by the progress Mike had made. The main living area had been cleared of debris, the worst of the leaks patched, and one wall freshly painted in a bright, cheerful blue that Olivia had selected. It was still far from finished, but it was beginning to look like a home rather than a wreck. With Tony's help, the electrical system gradually took shape. The old dangerous wiring was removed and replaced with properly rated marine-grade cables. New outlets were installed, properly grounded and sealed against moisture. Tony spent the better part of 2 days rewiring the most critical systems, refusing to accept payment beyond a promise of fresh fish for his family. With functional electricity restored, Mike was able to tackle the plumbing system. The boat's freshwater tank was cracked and needed replacement, but the basic plumbing infrastructure was salvageable. Mike spent several days crawling through cramped spaces beneath the floor, replacing corroded pipes and installing new fixtures. The work was dirty and frustrating, but gradually the boat's systems began to function again. 3 weeks into his renovation project, Mike was working in the galley area, replacing a section of flooring that had rotted through near the stove. The original flooring consisted of marine-grade plywood covered with linoleum, but years of moisture had caused the wood beneath to deteriorate badly. As Mike pried up a particularly stubborn section of flooring, his crowbar struck something solid beneath the plywood. Curious, Mike cleared away more of the rotted wood and discovered what appeared to be a metal panel set flush with the underlying structure. The panel was about 3 feet square and appeared to be made of stainless steel, though it was tarnished with age. There were no visible hinges or handles, but Mike could see a thin seam around the edges that suggested it was some kind of access panel. Mike tried to pry the panel loose with his crowbar, but it wouldn't budge. He examined the edges more carefully and noticed what looked like small screw holes, though any screws had long since disappeared. Using his drill, Mike carefully made new holes and inserted screws that would give him leverage to lift the panel. After considerable effort, the panel came free with a metallic screech that echoed through the boat's hull. Before Mike could investigate further, his phone rang. It was Rebecca, her voice tight with worry. Olivia had developed a high fever at school and was asking for him. Could he meet them at the hospital? Mike's heart raced as he quickly replaced the metal panel, not taking time to secure it properly. Whatever was hidden beneath the floor would have to wait. At the hospital, Mike found Olivia pale but alert, diagnosed with a severe ear infection. Rebecca had already spoken with the doctor and obtained a prescription for antibiotics. The three of them sat together in the examination room, temporarily united by concern for their daughter. For a brief moment, it felt like they were still a family. The bitterness of divorce temporarily set aside. After ensuring Olivia would be all right, Mike returned to the harbor late that evening. The second wind sat dark and quiet at its mooring, but as Mike approached, he felt a prickle of unease. Something was different, though he couldn't immediately identify what had changed. He climbed aboard cautiously, listening for any sound that might indicate an intruder. The interior of the boat appeared undisturbed at first glance, but as Mike moved through the main cabin, he noticed subtle signs that someone had been inside. A tool that had been left on the counter was now on the floor. The drawer containing his work gloves was partially open, and in the galley, the metal panel he had discovered earlier was slightly ajar, not how he had left it. Mike's heart pounded as he approached the panel. Someone had been looking for whatever was hidden beneath the floor, someone who knew exactly where to look. With trembling hands, he lifted the panel, completely revealing a compartment that appeared to have been custom-built into the boat's structure. The space was roughly 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, and about 18 inches deep. Mike's flashlight revealed that the compartment contained several wooden crates, each roughly the size of a shoebox. The crates appeared to be made of teak or another dense tropical hardwood and showed no signs of water damage, despite their location below the waterline. The compartment had been expertly sealed and waterproofed, suggesting that whatever was inside was valuable enough to warrant significant protection. Mike's hands trembled as he lifted the first crate from the compartment. It was heavier than he expected and felt solidly constructed. There was no obvious way to open it, no visible hinges or clasps, but Mike could see a thin seam around what appeared to be a lid. Using a thin-bladed knife, he carefully worked around the seam until the lid came loose. Inside the crate, nestled in what looked like custom-cut foam padding, were dozens of small objects that caught and reflected Mike's flashlight beam. They were roughly the size and shape of large marbles, but it was immediately clear they weren't glass. Each one had a deep green color with internal structures that seemed to glow when the light hit them at the right angle. Mike picked up one of the objects and held it to the light, his breath catching in his throat. He had seen pictures of uncut gemstones before, and these certainly looked like they could be emeralds, though he had no way of being certain. The stone in his hand could be worth anything from a few dollars to thousands, depending on its quality and authenticity. Mike carefully returned it to the crate and opened the second box. The second crate contained similar stones, though these seemed to be slightly larger and of varying shades of green. Some were nearly transparent, while others were so dark they appeared almost black. Mike counted roughly 30 stones in the second crate, each nestled in its own fitted compartment in the foam padding. The third and fourth crates contained similar collections, and by Mike's rough count, there were well over 100 individual stones in total. Mike sat back on his heels, staring at the open crates and trying to process what he had discovered. If these were genuine emeralds, and if they were of good quality, they could be worth a substantial amount of money. But Mike had no way of knowing if they were real, and even if they were, he had no idea how to value them or sell them legally. For all he knew, they could be clever fakes or low-grade stones worth very little. More troubling was the question of how the stones had ended up hidden in the boat. The compartment had clearly been built specifically to conceal them, and the care with which they had been packed suggested they were valuable to whoever had hidden them. Mike wondered if the stones were stolen or if they represented some kind of illegal activity. The last thing he needed was to become involved in something that could bring legal trouble or danger to himself and Olivia. Mike carefully replaced the stones in their crates and closed the lids. He put the crates back in the hidden compartment and replaced the metal panel, though he didn't screw it back down. He needed time to think about this discovery and decide what to do with it. For now, he would continue working on the boat renovations while he figured out his next move. The following day, Mike found it difficult to concentrate on his repair work. His mind kept returning to the hidden crates and their mysterious contents. During his lunch break, he drove to the public library and spent an hour researching emeralds on the internet. What he learned both excited and worried him. High-quality emeralds could indeed be extremely valuable, with the finest specimens selling for thousands of dollars per carat. But the emerald trade was also associated with various forms of illegal activity, from smuggling to money laundering. Mike learned that Colombia was the world's primary source of high-quality emeralds, and that the trade had historically been controlled by criminal organizations. Many emeralds entered the United States illegally, smuggled in to avoid taxes and regulations. If the stones Mike had found were genuine Colombian emeralds, and if they had been deliberately hidden in the boat, there was a good chance they represented some form of contraband. That evening, Mike called his old friend Alex Chen, who worked as a gemologist for a jewelry store in Boston. Mike and Alex had grown up together in Pelican Harbor, and Mike trusted him to be discreet. Without revealing too many details, Mike asked Alex about emerald identification and valuation. Alex explained that determining the authenticity and value of emeralds required specialized equipment and expertise, but that there were certain visual characteristics that could provide clues. They typically have a rich, vibrant green color, though shades can vary from light to dark. Natural emeralds usually have inclusions, small imperfections inside the stone, that gemologists sometimes call jardines or gardens because they look like little plants inside the emerald. Sudden interest in emeralds. Alex's voice was curious. You thinking about buying some jewelry for a special someone? Mike deflected the question, saying he was just curious about gemstones in general. Alex offered to take a look at any stones Mike might want evaluated, but Mike wasn't ready to reveal his discovery yet. He arranged to meet Alex the following week, ostensibly to catch up over beers, but with the intention of showing him one of the stones. Over the weekend, while Olivia visited with her mother, Mike did more research. He learned about the history of emerald smuggling and discovered several cases from the 1970s and 80s involving boats that had been used to transport contraband gemstones from South America to the United States. The more he read, the more convinced he became that his discovery might represent exactly this type of illegal cargo. Mike also researched the legal implications of finding valuable objects. He learned that the laws regarding treasure trove fines were complex and varied depending on the circumstances. If the emeralds were legitimate property that had been legally owned, Mike might have a claim to them as the boat's current owner. But if they were contraband or stolen goods, he could face legal problems for possessing them. Monday morning brought a new complication. As Mike worked on installing new kitchen cabinets in the galley, a shadow fell across the doorway. Mike looked up to see a man he didn't recognize standing on the deck. The man was well-dressed in an expensive-looking suit and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He appeared to be in his 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and deep-set eyes that studied Mike with unsettling intensity. The stranger introduced himself as Victor Reyes, his voice carrying a slight accent that Mike couldn't place. I understand you recently acquired this vessel. I represent a collector who specializes in vintage houseboats from this era. My client would be willing to pay a generous premium for the right boat. Mike studied the man's face, looking for some clue about his real motivations. Something about Reyes' demeanor made Mike uneasy, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The boat's not for sale. I just bought it and I'm fixing it up to live in. Reyes smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you would reconsider if the price were right. My client is prepared to offer $10,000, which I believe is significantly more than you paid at auction. Mike's heart rate increased at the mention of such a large sum, but he also felt a growing suspicion that Reyes's interest had nothing to do with vintage boat collecting. Like I said, she's not for sale. I'm planning to live here with my daughter. Reyes studied Mike for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Should you change your mind, please don't hesitate to contact me. The offer will remain open for a reasonable period of time. As he turned to leave, Reyes added casually, "It's an interesting vessel. I understand the previous owner was quite the character." Diego Morales, wasn't it? The mention of the former owner's name sent a chill through Mike. How would Reyes know who had owned the boat years ago? That information wasn't public knowledge. Even Mike had only learned it from Jackson Miller. After Reyes left, Mike examined the business card. It listed Reyes as a maritime acquisition specialist, but provided only a phone number, no address or company name. That evening, Mike called the number on Reyes' card from a payphone at a gas station. Using a fake name, he claimed to be interested in selling a boat. The person who answered was evasive about the company's background and seemed primarily interested in getting details about specific vessels rather than providing information about their services. Mike hung up feeling more convinced that Reyes's visit was related to his discovery of the emeralds. The next few days passed uneventfully, but Mike found himself constantly looking over his shoulder and watching for any sign that he was being observed. He varied his routine, arriving at the marina at different times and taking different routes. He also began carrying a small toolkit that included items that could serve as weapons if necessary, though he hoped it wouldn't come to that. On Thursday evening, Mike made a decision. He would take one of the emeralds to Alex Chen for evaluation, but he would present it as something he had found while fishing, not as part of a larger discovery. If Alex confirmed that the stone was genuine and valuable, Mike would then decide how to handle the rest of the collection. Friday morning, Mike carefully selected what appeared to be a medium-sized stone from one of the crates. He wrapped it in tissue paper and placed it in a small box, then drove to Boston to visit Alex at his jewelry store. The store was busy when Mike arrived, so he waited until there were no customers before approaching his friend. Alex greeted Mike warmly, leading him to a small office at the back of the store. Mike explained that he wanted Alex's professional opinion on something he'd found while cleaning out an old storage locker. It wasn't exactly a lie he had found the stone in storage, just not the kind he was implying. Alex opened the box and examined the stone under a bright light, using a jeweler's loupe to study its internal structure. His expression grew increasingly serious as he conducted his examination. "Mike, where exactly did you find this?" Alex set the stone down on a velvet pad. "This appears to be a genuine Colombian emerald of very high quality. The color is exceptional, and the clarity is remarkable for a stone of this size. If I had to guess, I'd say this could be worth anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000, maybe more depending on the exact specifications." Mike tried to keep his expression neutral, despite the shock of hearing such a large valuation. "Are you sure it's real? It could be synthetic or treated right." Alex shook his head. "The internal characteristics strongly suggest this is natural. The inclusions and color patterns are consistent with stones from the Muzo region of Colombia, which produces some of the world's finest emeralds. This is definitely not synthetic." Alex continued his examination, weighing the stone and measuring its dimensions. "This stone is approximately 8 carats, which puts it in the category of serious collector gemstones." "Mike, I have to ask again, where did you really find this stones like this? Don't just turn up in storage lockers." Mike stuck to his story about finding it among some old possessions, claiming he had no idea of its origin. "If that's true, you might want to go back and look for more," Alex said with a laugh. "Stones like this rarely travel alone. There could be a whole treasure trove down there." Mike forced a laugh in return, but Alex's words hit closer to home than his friend realized. What would someone do if they found more stones like this? Hypothetically, I mean. Alex's expression grew more serious. Hypothetically, they would need to be very careful about how they handled them. The emerald trade has some dark corners, and stones of this quality attract attention from people you might not want to meet. If someone found a collection of these, they would need expert help to authenticate them, establish their provenance, and find legitimate buyers. Mike thanked Alex for his time and promised to bring any additional stones he might find. As he drove back to Pelican Harbor, his mind raced with the implications of Alex's evaluation. If one stone was worth $15,000 to $20,000 and there were over 100 stones in the crates, the total value could easily exceed $1 million. Even if most of the stones were of lower quality, Mike was looking at a discovery that could transform his entire life. But Alex's warnings about the emerald trade echoed in Mike's mind. If the stones had been hidden in the boat, there was probably a good reason for the concealment. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to create that hidden compartment, and they had probably expected to return for their treasure eventually. The fact that Victor Reyes had approached him so soon after his purchase suggested that word of the boat's new ownership had reached people who knew about the hidden cargo. Over the weekend, Mike struggled with the decision of what to do next. He could try to sell the emeralds quietly, but that would require finding buyers who wouldn't ask too many questions about their origin. He could turn them over to law enforcement, but that would mean giving up what could be his ticket to financial security. Or he could try to establish their legal ownership through proper channels, though that process could take years and might ultimately result in the stones being claimed by the government or other parties. Mike's decision was made for him the following Tuesday when he arrived at the marina to find his boat had been searched. The search had been conducted carefully with most items returned to their approximate original positions, but Mike could tell that someone had been through the entire vessel. Most importantly, when he checked the hidden compartment, he found that the metal panel had been pried up and the crates had been moved, though they were still there. Mike's hands shook as he examined the crates. They appeared to contain the same number of stones, but he couldn't be certain without counting them individually. Someone clearly knew about the emeralds and had been looking for them. The fact that the stones hadn't been taken suggested either that the searcher had been interrupted or that they were looking for something specific and hadn't found it. That evening, Mike received a phone call from Victor Reyes. "Mr. Sullivan, I hope you've had time to reconsider my client's offer for your boat. Recent circumstances suggest that it would be in everyone's best interest to conclude this transaction quickly." The implied threat in Reyes' voice was unmistakable, and Mike felt a chill of fear run down his spine. "I told you the boat isn't for sale," Mike replied, trying to keep his voice steady, "and I don't appreciate people searching my property without permission." There was a long pause before Reyes responded. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mr. Sullivan, but I would strongly advise you to be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. My client's offer remains open, but it may not remain so indefinitely." After ending the call, Mike sat in his apartment, staring at the phone and trying to figure out his next move. It was clear that he was dealing with people who were willing to use intimidation and possibly worse to get what they wanted. Mike thought about his daughter and realized that his discovery had put not just himself, but Olivia in potential danger. The next morning, Mike made two decisions. First, he would move the emeralds to a more secure location. Second, he would seek legal advice about how to handle his discovery. The question of ownership was complex, and Mike needed to understand his rights and responsibilities before making any irreversible decisions. As Mike prepared to remove the emeralds from the boat, he noticed something unusual attached to the underside of the hull, a small electronic device with a tiny blinking light. It was a GPS tracking beacon recently installed, judging by the lack of marine growth on its surface. Someone was monitoring the boat's location, most likely the same people who had searched it. Mike's heart raced as he realized the implications. If Reyes or whoever he represented was willing to go to such lengths to track the boat, they might be willing to go even further to recover whatever they believed was hidden inside. The situation was more dangerous than Mike had initially thought. Later that afternoon, Mike received a text message from an unknown number. "Your daughter has a very pretty red backpack. She walks home from the bus stop alone. Reconsider the offer." Cold fear washed over Mike as he realized the threat was now directed at Olivia. He immediately called Rebecca, who confirmed that Olivia did indeed have a red backpack and that she sometimes walked the short distance from the bus stop to their house by herself. The implication was clear: whoever was after the emeralds knew where Olivia went to school and had been watching her. Mike called Rebecca and, without explaining the full situation, convinced her that there had been suspicious people around the marina and that it might be best if Olivia stayed with her exclusively for a few weeks until things calmed down. Rebecca, sensing the genuine fear in Mike's voice, agreed without much argument. That night, Mike removed the emeralds from the boat and stored them in a waterproof bag. He needed a safe place to keep them until he could figure out what to do next. The GPS tracker on his boat meant that his movements were being monitored, which limited his options. He couldn't risk leading Reyes or his associates to the emerald's new hiding place. Mike spent a sleepless night considering his options. By morning, he had made a decision. He would seek professional legal advice about the emeralds and report the threats against Olivia to the police. The emeralds might represent a life-changing fortune, but nothing was worth putting his daughter in danger. Whatever was hidden in those wooden crates, it came with complications that went far beyond their monetary value. The second win had offered Mike a chance at a fresh start, but its hidden cargo threatened to pull him under completely. As dawn broke over Pelican Harbor, Mike stared at the phone in his hand, ready to make the call that would set his next steps in motion. The floating home he had purchased as a sanctuary for himself and his daughter had become the center of a dangerous game with stakes far higher than he had ever anticipated. But one thing was certain: Mike Sullivan had never backed down from a challenge, and he wasn't about to start now. Not when Olivia's safety was on the line. Elizabeth Hoffman's law office overlooked Boston Harbor from the 8th floor of a restored wharf building. The walls displayed maritime artifacts alongside framed legal documents from famous shipping cases. Mike sat stiffly in a leather chair across from Hoffman, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her sharp eyes missed nothing as she reviewed the notes she'd taken during Mike's explanation of his situation. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Sullivan." Her voice was crisp, professional. "But before we discuss legal strategies, I need to see one of these emeralds myself." Mike hesitated, then withdrew a small box from his pocket. He'd brought just one stone, leaving the rest hidden in a waterproof lockbox buried beneath the floorboards of Tony's workshop garage, a location chosen specifically because it had no connection to Mike's usual haunts. Hoffman examined the emerald with a jeweler's loupe, her expression revealing nothing. "You found yourself in a complex legal situation with several potential outcomes. Under maritime law, when you purchased that vessel at a legally conducted auction, you acquired title to the boat and everything permanently affixed to it. The question is whether these emeralds were permanently affixed or merely stored aboard." Hoffman explained that the custom-built compartment could be considered a permanent part of the boat's structure, which would strengthen Mike's claim to its contents. However, if the emeralds were contraband that had been hidden illegally, the government could potentially seize them regardless of Mike's legitimate purchase of the vessel. The previous owner, Diego Morales. "Did you research him?" When Mike shook his head, Hoffman made a note. "I'll look into his background. We need to establish the provenance of these stones. If they're stolen or smuggled, we'll need a different approach than if they were legally acquired." Mike described Victor Reyes's visit and the subsequent threats, including the one directed at Olivia. Hoffman's expression hardened. "Threatening a child crosses a line. We should report this to the police immediately. That could expose the emeralds," Mike argued. "I don't even know if I legally own them yet." Hoffman's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Sullivan, no potential treasure is worth your daughter's safety. Let me be absolutely clear: if you choose not to report these threats, I will not represent you. Some things matter more than money or legal technicalities." The steel in Hoffman's voice left no room for argument. Mike nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. They spent the next hour developing a plan. First, Mike would file a police report about the threats and GPS tracker, focusing on the danger to Olivia without initially mentioning the emeralds. Second, Hoffman would research Morales' history and the legal precedents regarding found valuables. Third, they would consult with a gemologist to document the collection properly. "The greatest empires are built on the things we once considered disasters." Hoffman's voice softened slightly as Mike prepared to leave. "This discovery could change your life, Mr. Sullivan, but only if you handle it correctly. People have been destroyed by found fortunes when greed overshadowed judgment." Mike left Hoffman's office with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The emeralds represented a potential lifeline, a way out of financial hardship, and a chance to provide Olivia with the security he'd always wanted for her. But they also posed a significant danger, one that had already reached the doorstep of his child. At the local police station, Mike reported the threats and the GPS tracker to a detective named Garcia. He explained that someone was pressuring him to sell his recently purchased houseboat and had escalated to threatening his daughter. He showed the detective the text message and described finding the tracking device. Detective Garcia frowned as he reviewed the evidence. "This crosses several lines, Mr. Sullivan. Stalking threats against a minor, these are serious offenses. But without knowing who sent the text or placed the tracker, our options are limited. We can increase patrols near your daughter's school and your ex-wife's home, but I'd recommend additional precautions. Consider changing routines, limiting social media posts, and being vigilant about anyone following you." Mike agreed to the detective's suggestions, then hesitated. There was something else: he wasn't being completely forthright about why these people wanted his boat. Garcia noticed his hesitation. "Mr. Sullivan, I can only help you if you tell me everything. If there's more to this story, now's the time to share it. Mike made a split-second decision. I found something valuable hidden in the boat. I'm working with an attorney to determine the legal ownership. These people may believe it belongs to them. What exactly did you find? Garcia's expression sharpened. I'd rather not say yet, at least not until I've established my legal rights. But I believe it was hidden there by the previous owner, a man named Diego Morales. Garcia typed the name into his computer, waited a moment, then let out a low whistle. Diego Morales has quite a file. Suspected ties to Colombian drug trafficking in the late 70s and early 80s. Never convicted, but he was on several watch lists before his death in '79. Boat explosion ruled accidental, though there were suspicions it was a hit. His voice lowered. Whatever you found, Mr. Sullivan, it's likely connected to some very dangerous people. People with long memories and longer reach. The detective's words confirmed Mike's worst fears. He wasn't dealing with ordinary criminals, but with an organization that had roots stretching back decades, possibly connected to international drug cartels. Over the next week, Mike maintained vigilant awareness of his surroundings while Hoffman pursued her research. He stayed away from the second wind, except for brief daytime visits, always checking for surveillance before approaching. Tony noticed his friend's unusual behavior, but didn't press when Mike deflected his questions. On Friday afternoon, Hoffman called with an update. I found some interesting information about Morales. He was more than just a suspected drug trafficker. Colombian authorities believed he was involved in emerald smuggling as well. The emerald mines in Colombia were often controlled by the same cartels that trafficked cocaine, using the same routes and methods to move both commodities. Mike listened intently as Hoffman outlined what she'd discovered. Morales had owned several businesses in Miami that were suspected fronts for both drug and emerald smuggling operations. He'd purchased the second wind, then called La Esmeralda in 1969, and used it for trips up and down the East Coast. After his death, the boat had eventually been impounded for unpaid marina fees and forgotten in bureaucratic limbo until the recent auction. I've arranged for a gemologist specializing in emeralds to examine your stones, Hoffman continued. Dr. Rachel Martinez formerly worked for the Gemological Institute of America and has testified as an expert witness in several cases involving disputed gemstone ownership. She can determine their authenticity, quality, and possibly even their origin. 2 days later, Mike met Dr. Martinez at a secure facility Hoffman had arranged. Martinez was a formidable woman in her early 60s with sharp features and an analytical gaze that reminded Mike of a bird of prey. She wore no jewelry except for simple gold studs in her ears, though Mike had expected someone in her profession to display more of her expertise. Mike had retrieved all 4 crates from their hiding place, risking exposure to ensure a complete evaluation. Martinez spent nearly 3 hours conducting a detailed examination of the emerald collection. She photographed each stone, measured its dimensions and weight, and used specialized equipment to analyze optical properties and inclusions. These stones show characteristics consistent with emeralds from the Muzo and Chivor regions of Colombia. Martinez's voice was precise, authoritative. The inclusions and color patterns are exactly what I would expect from stones mined in the 1970s. More importantly, several of the larger stones show tool marks that are consistent with cutting techniques used during that period. Martinez paused, studying a particularly large emerald under her microscope. This is extraordinary. Most of these stones are gem quality with exceptional color and clarity. The collection as a whole could be worth between $15 and $20 million, possibly more if sold individually to collectors. But there's something else that concerns me. She showed Mike and Hoffman several stones that bore subtle marks on their surfaces. These cutting marks are distinctive. I've seen them before in stones associated with the Esmeralda cartel. This was a notorious organization that controlled much of the emerald trade out of Colombia in the 1970s and 80s. They were known for their brutality and their connections to other criminal enterprises. Martinez's revelation sent a chill through Mike. The name was too close to be coincidental. La Esmeralda, the boat's original name, clearly referenced the cartel. Hoffman asked Martinez if there was any way to establish legal ownership of stones with such origins. It's complicated. Martinez carefully returned the emeralds to their crates. The stones themselves aren't illegal. Emeralds are just minerals. But their importation may have violated customs laws, tax regulations, and trade restrictions. However, those violations occurred decades ago, and statutes of limitations may have expired for many of those crimes. The more pressing issue is whether anyone still connected to the Esmeralda cartel is looking for these stones. As Mike left the meeting, his mind raced with implications. If the emeralds were connected to a notorious cartel, that explained Reyes's persistent interest and willingness to make threats. It also raised the stakes considerably. He wasn't dealing with an individual, but with an organization that had a history of violence. That evening, Mike received an unexpected visit from Rebecca. She stood on his apartment doorstep, arms crossed defensively, her expression a mixture of anger and concern. "Whatever trouble you're in, you need to tell me now. The police came by the house today to check our security and suggest precautionary measures. I deserve to know what's happening if it involves our daughter." Mike hesitated, then invited her inside. He couldn't tell her everything, not yet, but he owed her some explanation. Rebecca listened in growing horror as Mike described the threats and surveillance, though he carefully avoided mentioning the emeralds, saying only that he'd found something valuable in the boat that others wanted. Rebecca's face paled as the implications sank in. All this for a boat? She shook her head in disbelief. "I always thought your fishing business was risky enough. But this? You need to walk away, Mike. Whatever you found, it's not worth Olivia's safety." "I can't just walk away." Mike's voice was tight with frustration. "These people won't stop. They've already tracked me down, searched my boat, threatened our daughter. Running won't solve anything." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Then what's your plan here, Mike? Because from where I'm standing, you've dragged our daughter into danger for some get-rich-quick scheme." Her words stung partly because they contained a kernel of truth. Mike had initially seen the emeralds as a financial salvation, a way to solve his problems. He hadn't fully considered the consequences until the threats began. "I'm working with an attorney and the police," Mike said quietly. "We're taking precautions. Olivia will be safe, I promise you that. If necessary, I'll give up everything. But I need time to resolve this properly." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, searching for reassurance in his expression. Finally, she nodded. "1 week. You have 1 week to fix this, or I'm filing for full custody and a restraining order. I won't have our daughter endangered by whatever mess you have created." After Rebecca left, Mike sat alone in his apartment, feeling the walls closing in. He needed to resolve the situation quickly, but the legal process Hoffman had outlined would take months, not days. He was running out of options and time. The next morning brought a new complication. Mike arrived at the marina to check on the second wind, only to find 2 men in dark suits waiting near his boat. They introduced themselves as FBI agents, Clark and Diaz, showing credentials that appeared legitimate. "Mr. Sullivan, we understand you may have come into possession of certain items that could be evidence in a federal investigation." Agent Clark was tall and lean with the weathered face of someone who spent time outdoors, despite his office attire. "We're not here to arrest anyone or seize property, but we would appreciate your cooperation." Mike's heart raced as he tried to maintain a neutral expression. He didn't ask how they knew about the emeralds or why they were suddenly interested in a decades-old case. Instead, he told them he was already working with an attorney and suggested they contact Elizabeth Hoffman. Agent Diaz, shorter and more intense than his partner, leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Sullivan, we've been investigating the Esmeralda cartel's operations since the early 1970s. While Diego Morales' death ended our ability to prosecute him directly, we've continued to track the movement of emeralds that were part of his operation, hoping to identify other members of the smuggling ring. We have reason to believe that Morales hid a significant quantity of emeralds shortly before his death." Clark continued. "These stones were purchased with the proceeds of illegal activities, but under current federal guidelines, their discovery doesn't automatically make them subject to forfeiture if they're found by an innocent third party." Mike was surprised by this information, as he had expected the FBI to demand immediate surrender of the emeralds. Clark explained that federal asset forfeiture laws had evolved significantly since the 1970s, and that courts had become more protective of innocent property owners who discovered valuable items through legitimate means. "What we're proposing is a cooperative arrangement." Clark's voice was reasonable, measured. "You would work with us to authenticate the emeralds and establish their connection to Morales' operation. In exchange, we would support your legal claim to ownership and help you establish clear title that would allow you to sell the stones through legitimate channels." This offer was far more favorable than anything Mike had expected from law enforcement. Clark explained that the FBI's primary interest was in closing their investigation and recovering intelligence about the Esmeralda cartel's operation, not in seizing assets from innocent citizens. The emeralds themselves were less important than the information they might provide about related cases that were still active. Mike told the agents he would discuss their proposal with Hoffman and get back to them. As they left, Agent Diaz handed Mike a card with his direct number. A word of advice: Mr. Sullivan, be careful who you trust. The Esmeralda cartel may be largely defunct, but some of its former members have integrated into modern criminal enterprises. They've been looking for these emeralds for a very long time. Mike immediately called Hoffman to report the FBI contact. She was skeptical about their cooperative approach, but agreed to meet with the agents to verify their credentials and discuss their proposal. Meanwhile, she advised Mike to maintain his normal routine while remaining vigilant. That evening, as Mike returned to his apartment after checking on the second wind, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The vehicle had tinted windows that prevented him from seeing the occupants, but he sensed he was being watched. He took a circuitous road home, cutting through alleyways and doubling back several times, but couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The next day, Hoffman confirmed that Agents Clark and Diaz were legitimate FBI personnel with authorization to negotiate regarding the emeralds. She had reviewed their proposal and found it surprisingly favorable, though she recommended several modifications to protect Mike's interests. The Esmeralda collection, as it's apparently known in certain circles, has a complicated history, Hoffman explained. According to the FBI, these emeralds were part of a larger collection that disappeared in the mid-1970s. Some stones turned up on the black market, but the majority vanished. The assumption was that Morales had hidden them somewhere before his death. Mike listened as Hoffman outlined the FBI's theory. Morales had been a middleman in the emerald smuggling operation responsible for moving stones from Colombia to various destinations in the United States. When a deal went bad in 1978, resulting in the death of several cartel members, Morales apparently took the emeralds he was transporting and went into hiding. His death in 1979 was almost certainly retribution, but the cartel never recovered the emeralds. So Victor Reyes is what a modern representative of this cartel Mike asked. According to the FBI, Reyes is actually Carlos Mendoza, a Colombian national with suspected ties to emerald smuggling operations dating back to the 1970s. Hoffman's expression was grave. He's apparently been monitoring auction sales of boats and other assets that might contain hidden emeralds from various Esmeralda cartel operations. The revelation that Reyes was actually Mendoza confirmed Mike's worst fears. He was dealing with someone directly connected to the original criminal enterprise, someone who had been searching for these emeralds for decades. Before Mike could respond, his phone rang. It was Detective Garcia, his voice urgent. "Mr. Sullivan, someone just vandalized your boat. Extensive damage. You should get down here right away." Mike rushed to the marina, his heart pounding. The second wind had been attacked systematically. Windows smashed, newly installed fixtures, torn out holes punched in the hull below the waterline. The boat was already sitting lower in the water than it should, gradually sinking at its mooring. Harbor Patrol officers were attempting to pump out the water, but the damage was severe. On the cabin door, someone had carved a message: "Next time, your daughter. Last chance." Detective Garcia documented the threat while Mike worked with Tony and several harbor employees to save the second wind. They managed to patch the worst leaks and stabilize the vessel, but it was clear that weeks of restoration work had been undone in a single act of vandalism. "You can't stay here tonight," Tony insisted when they'd finally stopped the boat from sinking. "Come to my place. Lisa won't mind, and it's safer than your apartment." Mike agreed, grateful for his friend's support. He gathered essential items from his apartment, constantly checking to ensure he wasn't followed, then drove to Tony's modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The Rodriguez family welcomed him warmly, setting up the spare room without asking questions about the circumstances. That night, unable to sleep, Mike sat on the edge of the guest bed contemplating his options. The emeralds were still hidden in Tony's garage just feet away, their presence a dangerous secret that threatened everything Mike cared about. Mendoza had escalated from surveillance to property destruction, and his threats against Olivia were becoming more explicit. Time was running out. The next morning, Mike met with Hoffman, the FBI agents, and Detective Garcia to develop a coordinated response to the escalating threats. Garcia had increased patrols near Rebecca's home and Olivia's school, while agents Clark and Diaz were pursuing leads on Mendoza's whereabouts. Hoffman had accelerated her legal research, focusing on precedents that might help establish Mike's claim to the emeralds. "I've found something that might help," Hoffman announced during the meeting. The United States v. Certain Artifacts case from 1982. A commercial fisherman discovered pre-Columbian artifacts hidden in a shipwreck off the Florida coast. The artifacts had been stolen from a museum in Mexico years earlier. The court ruled that while the artifacts should be returned to Mexico as cultural heritage, the fisherman was entitled to a substantial finder's fee because he had reported the discovery promptly and cooperated with authorities. "How does that help us?" Mike asked. "If we can establish that you acted in good faith by seeking legal counsel and cooperating with law enforcement, it strengthens your claim to at least a portion of the emerald's value." Hoffman's expression was cautiously optimistic. "The key is demonstrating that you've taken appropriate steps to determine the legal ownership rather than attempting to conceal or sell the emeralds illicitly." While Hoffman and the FBI agents discussed legal strategies, Mike's phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Boat was a warning. Final offer $2 million, cash for all stones, 1 hour to decide. Then we take them our way." Mike showed the message to the others. Clark immediately began coordinating with technical specialists to trace the message, while Diaz contacted additional agents for support. Garcia called for police backup at Tony's house, where the emeralds were still hidden. "We need to move the stones to a secure location immediately," Clark insisted. "Our field office has appropriate facilities. Once they're safely in custody, we can continue our legal discussions." Mike agreed, recognizing the immediate danger. Clark and Diaz drove to Tony's house in an unmarked FBI vehicle, constantly checking for surveillance. They retrieved the waterproof container holding the 4 crates of emeralds from beneath Tony's garage floor and quickly transferred them to the FBI vehicle. As they prepared to leave, Mike noticed a black SUV slowly passing the house, the same vehicle he'd seen near his apartment. Diaz spotted it too, immediately alerting other agents via radio. The SUV accelerated suddenly, tires squealing as it sped away. "They've been watching your friend's house," Diaz said grimly. "We need to move now." The drive to the FBI field office was tense, with Clark taking evasive maneuvers to ensure they weren't followed. Upon arrival, the emeralds were logged into evidence and secured in a high-security vault. Mike provided a detailed statement about finding the stones and subsequent events, while the agents began preparing documentation to support his potential claim. Later that afternoon, the FBI made a startling discovery during their preliminary examination of the emeralds. Agent Clark called Mike and Hoffman to the field office to share what they had found. "Mr. Sullivan, these emeralds are even more significant than we initially thought." Clark spread photographs across the conference table. "We believe they're part of the Buenaventura collection, a famous group of emeralds stolen from the National Museum of Colombia in 1974. The collection was named for the port city where the emeralds were first processed after mining." Hoffman leaned forward, studying the photographs. "How does this affect our legal position?" "It complicates things." Clark's expression was grave. "If these emeralds are confirmed to be from the Buenaventura collection, they would be considered stolen cultural heritage. The Colombian government would have a strong claim for their return." Mike felt his hopes sinking. "So I have no claim to them at all?" "Not necessarily." Clark spread out more documents. "The theft occurred over 50 years ago. Under international agreements regarding cultural heritage, there are provisions for compensation to good faith discoverers who assist in returning stolen artifacts. You could still be entitled to a substantial finder's fee, especially if your cooperation leads to the resolution of this long-standing case." Mike spent the next several hours reviewing documentation about the Buenaventura collection with Hoffman. The emeralds had been part of a special exhibition highlighting Colombia's mineral wealth when they were stolen in a sophisticated heist. The thieves had never been identified, though Colombian authorities had long suspected the Esmeralda cartel's involvement. The estimated value of the complete collection in today's market would exceed $25 million. As Mike prepared to leave the FBI office, his phone rang. It was Rebecca, her voice taut with controlled panic. "Mike, there was a man watching the house today. The police spotted him and approached, but he drove away. They said he matches the description of someone named Mendoza. I'm taking Olivia to my sister's in New Hampshire until this is over." Mike assured Rebecca he was working with the FBI to resolve the situation quickly and promised to call with updates. After ending the call, he turned to Clark and Diaz, his expression hardening. "We need to end this now. Mendoza is escalating and my family isn't safe. The agents exchanged glances. We've been developing a plan, Diaz said carefully, but it involves risk to you. I'll do whatever it takes, Mike replied without hesitation. Just tell me what you need. The plan they outlined was dangerous but potentially effective. Mike would contact Mendoza claiming he was willing to negotiate the return of the emeralds for a cash payment. The meeting would be monitored by FBI agents who would arrest Mendoza when he attempted to take possession of what he believed were the emeralds. In reality, Mike would be carrying a case containing tracking devices and fake stones prepared by the FBI laboratory. That evening, Mike sent a text message to the number that had contacted him earlier. I'll take the $2 million. Too much heat from FBI. Need to meet tomorrow to exchange. The response came quickly. Pier 14, Warehouse 3, midnight. Come alone. Bring all stones. No police or no deal. The FBI spent the next day preparing for the operation. Agents surveilled the meeting location, identifying security cameras and potential escape routes. They fitted Mike with a concealed recording device and placed tracking equipment in the case he would carry. Diaz coached Mike on what to say and how to behave during the meeting to keep Mendoza talking without arousing suspicion. As midnight approached, Mike drove to the designated warehouse, his heart pounding. The pier was deserted, most businesses closed for the night. Warehouse 3 loomed ahead, a massive concrete structure with few windows and multiple loading bays. FBI agents were positioned nearby, invisible in the shadows, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. Mike parked where instructed and approached the small side door of the warehouse, carrying the case of fake emeralds. The door was unlocked. Inside, the cavernous space was dimly lit with shipping containers and crates, creating a maze of corridors and hidden corners. The air smelled of sea salt and diesel fuel. Mr. Sullivan, a voice echoed from deeper in the warehouse. So good of you to join us. Mike followed the voice, turning a corner to find Carlos Mendoza seated at a metal table, flanked by two men whose bulky jackets suggested concealed weapons. Mendoza looked much as he had when posing as Victor Reyes, though he had abandoned the pretense of refinement. His expression was harder, his posture more openly threatening. I brought what you asked for. Mike placed the case on the table, keeping his voice steady despite his fear. Mendoza smiled thinly. And I have brought what you asked for. He gestured to a metal briefcase beside him. $2 million is agreed, but first let me see the merchandise. As Mike opened the case, revealing the carefully arranged fake emeralds, Mendoza leaned forward eagerly. His expression changed as he picked up one of the stones, examining it closely. You think I wouldn't know the difference? Mendoza's voice was dangerously soft. I've been searching for these emeralds for 30 years. Did you really believe I would fall for glass replicas? Before Mike could respond, Mendoza nodded to one of his men, who grabbed Mike roughly and pressed a gun to his ribs. The other man quickly searched him, finding and removing the concealed recording device. Did you come alone? Mr. Sullivan, Mendoza's voice was almost conversational. Or shall we wait for your FBI friends to join us? Mike's mind raced, trying to calculate how long it would take the agents to realize something had gone wrong. The plan had called for them to move in once Mike had confirmed seeing the money, but the recording device was supposed to transmit that signal. Now that it had been discovered and disabled, the agents might not know he was in trouble. Mendoza rose from his seat, circling the table to stand directly in front of Mike. The Buenaventura emeralds are more than just valuable stones, Mr. Sullivan. They represent a legacy, my legacy. My father was one of the original members of the Esmeralda cartel. He died trying to recover these stones from Diego Morales. I've spent my entire adult life searching for them, and I will not be denied now that they've finally surfaced. Mike struggled to remain calm as Mendoza continued his monologue, explaining how the emeralds had been stolen from the museum by cartel members working with corrupt security guards. The heist had been commissioned by an American collector, but Morales had double-crossed both the cartel and the collector, keeping the emeralds for himself. There is one stone in particular that interests me above all others. Mendoza's eyes gleamed with intensity. El Corazón de Colombia, the heart of Colombia. A heart-shaped emerald of exceptional quality, the centerpiece of the Buenaventura collection. It wasn't among the stones you showed my men when they searched your boat. Where is it? I don't know what you're talking about, Mike insisted truthfully. I found 4 crates of emeralds, nothing more. Mendoza studied Mike's face, then nodded slightly, apparently believing him. Perhaps Morales hid it separately. No matter, we'll find it eventually. Now, Mr. Sullivan, you're going to tell me where the real emeralds are. The man holding Mike tightened his grip painfully to emphasize the demand. Before Mike could respond, the warehouse was suddenly plunged into darkness. A moment later, the emergency exit doors burst open and multiple voices shouted, "FBI, don't move!" Gunfire erupted in the darkness. Mike dropped to the floor, crawling behind a stack of crates for protection. He could hear shouting and the sound of running feet as Mendoza and his men attempted to escape. More agents poured into the warehouse flashlights, cutting through the darkness as they secured the area. When the lights came back on, Agent Clark helped Mike to his feet. One of Mendoza's men was in custody, bleeding from a shoulder wound. The other had been captured, trying to flee through a loading bay. But Mendoza himself was nowhere to be found. "He got away," Clark admitted grimly, "but we've got his men and we've identified his operation. He won't get far." Mike was escorted to an FBI vehicle and driven to a secure location where he provided a detailed statement about the encounter. Hoffman arrived shortly afterward, having been notified of the operation's outcome. Together, they listened as Clark outlined the next steps in the investigation. "Mendoza is now our top priority." Clark's voice was determined. "We're coordinating with international agencies and local police. His accounts have been frozen. His known associates are under surveillance, and we've issued alerts at all transportation hubs. It's only a matter of time." Despite these assurances, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that Mendoza wouldn't give up so easily, not after searching for the emeralds for 3 decades. As long as Mendoza remained free, Mike and his family would be at risk. "What about this heart of Colombia that Mendoza mentioned?" Hoffman asked. "Is that a real emerald?" Clark nodded, pulling a file from his briefcase. El Corazón de Colombia was the centerpiece of the Buenaventura collection. A heart-shaped emerald weighing approximately 75 carats, it was considered one of the finest examples of Colombian emeralds in the world. Its estimated value today would be over $5 million, but its cultural significance to Colombia makes it effectively priceless. He showed them a photograph of the emerald, a stunning heart-shaped stone of deep, vibrant green. The gem was mounted in an elaborate gold setting designed to resemble vines and leaves, with smaller emeralds and diamonds accentuating the main stone. "If this emerald wasn't among the ones you found, Mr. Sullivan, then it's still missing." Clark's expression was troubled. "And Mendoza will continue searching for it, regardless of whether we recover the rest of the collection." Mike stared at the photograph, a sense of unease growing within him. Mendoza believed the heart of Colombia was still hidden somewhere associated with the Morales or the second wind. As long as that belief persisted, the danger wouldn't end. The following day, Mike returned to check on the second wind, accompanied by an FBI agent for protection. The boat had been stabilized, though the damage from Mendoza's vandalism was extensive. As Mike surveyed the destruction, his phone rang. It was Rebecca. "Olivia keeps asking about her pirate treasure," Rebecca said without preamble. "She says she found something on your boat a few weeks ago and wants to know if it's still there after the bad people damaged it." Mike's heart skipped a beat. "What treasure? What did she find?" "I don't know. Some special green rock she found while playing hide and seek on the boat. She hid it in her secret pirate chest in her room. I thought it was just a game, but she's very concerned about it." Mike's mind raced as he realized what might have happened. During Olivia's weekend visit, while they were working on the boat together, she must have found something, possibly in a part of the hidden compartment he hadn't fully explored, or perhaps Morales had hidden the heart of Colombia separately from the other emeralds. "Can you check her room?" Mike tried to keep his voice casual. "See if this treasure is still there." Rebecca agreed, putting down the phone briefly. When she returned, her voice was puzzled. "There's a small wooden box under her bed that she calls her treasure chest. Inside is, well, it looks like a large green stone, heart-shaped. Is this important, Mike?" Mike closed his eyes, realizing the implications. His 8-year-old daughter had unwittingly found one of the most valuable emeralds in the world, the very stone Mendoza was desperate to recover. And now Mendoza was watching Rebecca's house. "Whatever you do, don't tell anyone about this," Mike said urgently. "Stay where you are with your sister. I'm coming with the FBI right now." As Mike ended the call and turned to the FBI agent accompanying him, a chilling realization washed over him. The most precious things in his life, his daughter and the emerald she had innocently claimed as pirate treasure, were now both targets of a man who had spent 30 years searching for the Buenaventura collection. The final confrontation wouldn't happen in a warehouse or on his boat, but at Rebecca's home, where Olivia's innocent discovery had unknowingly set the stage for a dangerous showdown. The New Hampshire safe house sat nestled among tall pines, its location chosen for isolation and defensibility. FBI agents patrolled the perimeter while Mike, Rebecca, and Olivia waited inside with agents Clark and Diaz. The wooden box containing the heart of Columbia rested on the kitchen table, its innocent appearance belying its extraordinary value and the danger it represented. Olivia sat close to her father, confusion evident in her eyes as she watched armed agents moving purposefully around the property. "I found it in a special hiding place on your boat, Daddy. It was glowing green in my flashlight like magic." The 8-year-old's voice dropped to a whisper. "Is it really treasure? Are those men really after it, like in the movies?" Mike carefully considered how to explain the situation without frightening her. "It's a very special stone that was lost for a long time. These FBI agents are helping us keep it safe until we can return it to the people it belongs to." Agent Clark examined the emerald, comparing it to photographs in his file. "There's no doubt this is a Corazon de Colombia. The cut color and specific inclusions match the museum documentation perfectly. Your daughter found what international investigators have been seeking for 5 decades." Rebecca paced the small living room, arms wrapped tightly around herself, tension visible in every movement. "So what happens now? Do we just wait here while this Mendoza person hunts us down?" The bitter edge in her voice had softened, replaced by genuine concern. Diaz outlined their strategy. "We're not waiting passively. We're setting a trap. Mendoza wants this emerald badly enough to risk exposure. We'll use that against him." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using carefully controlled information leaks, they would allow Mendoza to discover the safe house location. Meanwhile, they would evacuate Rebecca and Olivia to a different facility, leaving Mike and a team of agents to capture Mendoza when he attempted to retrieve the heart. As Rebecca and Olivia prepared to leave, an unexpected moment of connection passed between the former spouses. Rebecca touched Mike's arm gently. "I don't like leaving you behind." Her voice carried an emotion Mike hadn't heard in years. "Despite everything, just be careful." Mike watched as a female agent escorted Rebecca and Olivia to a waiting SUV with tinted windows. Olivia waved goodbye, clutching the wooden treasure chest that had once held the emerald. The sight of the empty box struck Mike with the cruel irony of the situation, how innocently this crisis had begun with a child's game of hide-and-seek aboard a derelict houseboat. After their departure, the FBI team transformed the safe house into an elaborate trap. Surveillance cameras were installed, recording devices hidden, and agents positioned strategically throughout the property. The heart of Columbia was secured in a special container equipped with tracking devices, then placed prominently on a table near the window where it would be visible to anyone watching the house. "Now we wait," Clark announced after the final preparations were complete. "Mendoza is cautious but desperate. Those two traits in combination make him predictable." The night passed with excruciating slowness. Mike dozed fitfully on the living room sofa while agents maintained their positions. Shortly before dawn, movement sensors at the property perimeter triggered silent alerts throughout the house. The trap was about to be sprung. Mike took his position in the kitchen with a clear view of the emerald. Minutes crawled by each second, stretching with unbearable tension. Then came the sound of breaking glass from the rear of the house, followed by the distinctive thud of a smoke grenade. The FBI had anticipated this tactic, equipping their agents with night vision goggles and gas masks. Through the thickening smoke, dark figures moved with military precision. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks piercing the pre-dawn stillness. Mike ducked behind the kitchen counter as bullets splintered wood above his head. The FBI agents returned fire their positions, allowing them to target the intruders without risking crossfire. 2 of Mendoza's men fell immediately while others retreated for better cover. Through the chaos, a familiar figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. Carlos Mendoza, his face partially covered by a tactical mask, a pistol in one hand. Unlike his men who moved with professional caution, Mendoza advanced directly toward the display containing the heart of Columbia, seemingly oblivious to the gunfire around him. His focus on the emerald was absolute, almost reverent. Mike seized this moment of distraction, lunging from his position to tackle Mendoza. The 2 men crashed into the kitchen table, sending the emerald's container skidding across the floor. Mendoza was stronger than his refined appearance suggested, landing a vicious blow to Mike's jaw that sent him reeling backward. "You cost me everything." Mendoza's eyes burned with decades of obsession as he aimed his pistol at Mike's chest. "My father died searching for this. I've spent my life pursuing it. No fisherman, no FBI, no one will stop me now." A single gunshot echoed through the kitchen. Mendoza staggered backwards, blood blossoming on his shoulder where Agent Diaz's bullet had struck him. He stumbled against the wall, his weapon clattering to the floor. With remarkable resilience, he lunged for the emerald's container, clutching it to his chest as he crashed through the back door. Clark and two other agents pursued him into the forest while Diaz helped Mike to his feet. Mike's jaw throbbed where Mendoza had struck him, but adrenaline dulled the pain. "Is he getting away?" Mike gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "Not a chance." Diaz's voice carried absolute certainty. "The container has multiple tracking devices, and we've got the perimeter surrounded. Mendoza just ran straight into our secondary trap." Within 15 minutes, Clark returned with news of Mendoza's capture. 3 surviving members of his team were also in custody. The heart of Colombia was secure, though its container had been damaged in the struggle. Most importantly, the threat to Mike and his family had been neutralized. As dawn broke over the New Hampshire forest, Mike stood on the safe house porch watching FBI technicians processing evidence and medics treating the wounded. The violent culmination of the 50-year saga of the Buenaventura collection had been decisive, but Mike knew the legal complications surrounding the emeralds were just beginning. The following weeks brought an exhausting series of debriefings, depositions, and legal consultations. The emeralds were secured in an FBI evidence facility, while multiple agencies determined their proper disposition. Hoffman worked tirelessly coordinating with federal prosecutors handling Mendoza's case, while simultaneously researching international precedents that might support Mike's claim to some portion of the emerald's value. 30 days after Mendoza's capture, Mike found himself in a Department of Justice conference room facing representatives from the FBI State Department, Treasury Department, and the Colombian consulate. The emerald sat in a secure display case at the center of the table, the first time the complete Buenaventura collection had been assembled in one place since its theft in 1974. Colombian cultural attaché Elena Vasquez presented her government's position with diplomatic precision. "These emeralds are not merely valuable gemstones, they are part of Colombia's cultural identity, stolen during a period of national turmoil. Their return represents a healing of historical wounds and a restoration of our heritage. While we appreciate Mr. Sullivan's role in their recovery, these treasures belong to the Colombian people." Hoffman acknowledged the validity of Colombia's claim while emphasizing Mike's good faith actions. Mr. Sullivan could have attempted to sell these emeralds privately once he discovered them. Instead, he sought legal counsel, cooperated with federal authorities, and risked his life to secure their recovery. His actions directly led to the capture of Carlos Mendoza and the dismantling of a criminal enterprise that has operated with impunity for decades. The negotiations stretched across 3 months of complex legal maneuvering. Mike's tax liability alone required a specialized attorney to navigate the labyrinthine regulations governing found property, international repatriation, and potential finder's fees. Meanwhile, Rebecca unexpectedly became an ally, testifying about Mendoza's surveillance of their home and the very real danger their daughter had faced. What began as an adversarial proceeding gradually evolved into a collaborative effort to find an equitable resolution. Mike's cooperation with law enforcement and willingness to acknowledge Colombia's legitimate claim to the emeralds created goodwill that proved invaluable during the negotiations. Finally, a comprehensive agreement emerged. The entire Buenaventura collection, including the Heart of Colombia, would be returned to the National Museum in Bogotá. In exchange, the Colombian government would pay Mike a finder's fee of $5 million, approximately 20% of the collection's estimated market value. Additionally, Mike would receive exclusive rights to market authorized replicas of the collection, creating a sustainable business opportunity beyond the one-time payment. When the details were finalized, Vasquez approached Mike with unexpected warmth. "Sometimes treasures find the right person at the right moment. Mr. Sullivan, your discovery has completed a circle that began half a century ago. The Buenaventura emeralds are going home because you chose integrity over personal gain. Colombia will not forget this." The resolution brought Mike both financial security and closure. After taxes and legal fees, his net settlement amounted to just over $3 million, enough to transform his life while avoiding the complications of extreme wealth. More importantly, the settlement cleared his legal title to the funds, allowing him to use them without fear of future claims or criminal implications. His first major decision was purchasing a waterfront home in Pelican Harbor with a private dock. The property wasn't ostentatious, but it offered a spectacular view of the bay and enough space for both Mike and Olivia to feel comfortable. Most importantly, the dock provided a permanent home for the second wind, which Mike was determined to fully restore as a symbol of his journey. The boat renovation took on new meaning now. What had begun as a desperate attempt to create affordable housing became a labor of love and remembrance. Tony Rodriguez oversaw the electrical work, installing systems far superior to the original design. The hull was professionally repaired, the roof replaced, and the interior completely redesigned to create a comfortable space that retained the character of the original vessel while incorporating modern conveniences. One area Mike insisted on preserving was the hidden compartment beneath the galley floor. Though it no longer contained emeralds, he converted it into a time capsule containing mementos of their extraordinary journey, photographs, newspaper clippings, and a small replica of the Heart of Columbia commissioned from a local jeweler. With his financial future secure, Mike transformed his struggling fishing business into Sullivan's Maritime Charters, offering luxury fishing and sightseeing excursions. He purchased a sleek sport fishing boat, hired experienced crew members, and developed marketing materials that subtly referenced his role in recovering the Emerald Collection without violating his confidentiality agreements with the FBI. Perhaps most significantly, Mike established the Second Wind Foundation, a nonprofit organization providing financial assistance to single parents facing housing insecurity. The foundation offered emergency loans, job training programs, and temporary housing assistance to help families weather difficult transitions, a mission born directly from Mike's own experience. His relationship with Rebecca evolved during the aftermath of the Mendoza threat. Their shared concern for Olivia's safety had temporarily bridged the gulf created by their divorce, reminding them both of the priorities that transcended their personal differences. During one particularly difficult meeting with federal prosecutors, Rebecca had surprised Mike by firmly defending his character and parenting skills. "I spent years thinking Mike's unreliable nature was our marriage's downfall," Rebecca had told the prosecutors. "But when our daughter was threatened, I saw something different. He wasn't just willing to risk his life, he was willing to give up a fortune to keep her safe. That's not the action of an unreliable man." This newfound respect led to a revised custody arrangement, giving Mike equal time with his daughter. Olivia now spent alternating weeks with each parent, with transitions occurring at school to minimize direct contact between Mike and Rebecca. The arrangement provided stability while allowing Olivia to maintain strong relationships with both parents. 6 months after the Emerald settlement, an unexpected opportunity arose when Mike received an invitation to speak at Olivia's school about maritime history and treasure recovery. The invitation presented both a challenge and an opportunity. His agreement with the FBI limited what he could disclose about the case, particularly while Mendoza's prosecution was ongoing. Yet he also recognized a chance to address the whispers and speculation that had begun to circulate about his sudden change in fortune. With Hoffman's guidance, Mike developed a presentation focused on maritime archaeology, historical shipwrecks, and the legal frameworks governing treasure discovery. He used the well-documented salvage of the SS Central America as his primary example, only briefly mentioning his own experience without specific details about the emeralds or Mendoza. The school auditorium was packed on the evening of the presentation. Among the attendees was Richard Blackwood, a prominent Boston attorney whose daughter attended the same private school where Olivia had recently enrolled. Blackwood's reputation for social elitism was well known, and his presence suggested more than casual interest in Mike's story. During the question and answer session, Blackwood rose to confront Mike directly. "Mr. Sullivan, don't you think there's something unseemly about profiting from what was essentially a criminal enterprise, even if you weren't personally involved in the original illegal activities?" The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Blackwood was suggesting that Mike's newfound wealth was tainted by his connection to smuggling and theft, regardless of the legal resolution. Several parents shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned forward, eager to hear Mike's response. Mike considered his words carefully, aware that his answer would define how the community viewed both him and Olivia. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your concern, but I would ask you to consider a different perspective. Those emeralds sat hidden and worthless for over 40 years. By bringing them into the legitimate market through proper channels, I helped law enforcement close a decades-old case and ensured that valuable cultural artifacts were returned to their rightful owners. Mike continued with growing confidence. Rather than profiting from criminal activity, I helped transform the legacy of criminal activity into something positive. The emeralds have generated tax revenue, supported legitimate businesses, and funded charitable activities that help families right here in our community. Most importantly, they've been returned to the country and museum they were stolen from, where they can be appreciated by everyone, not just a single collector. The auditorium erupted in applause with several parents rising to their feet. Blackwood remained seated, his expression unreadable, but the damage his insinuation might have caused had been effectively neutralized. As the presentation concluded, many attendees approached Mike to express their support and ask questions about the Second Wind Foundation. Even Blackwood eventually made his way to the podium, offering a grudging acknowledgement. "I may have misjudged your situation, Mr. Sullivan. Your presentation was quite enlightening, and I can see that you've handled everything with remarkable integrity." The school presentation marked a turning point in Mike's integration into his new social context. Rather than trying to hide the unusual circumstances of his changed fortune, he had addressed them directly, emphasizing the ethical choices he had made throughout the process. This approach resonated with the community, generating support rather than suspicion. As the months passed, Mike's vision for the Second Wind Foundation expanded beyond housing assistance to include educational programs about maritime history, legal ethics, and responsible wealth management. He partnered with local universities to fund research into treasure discovery law and worked with the Coast Guard to develop training programs for recreational boaters who might encounter valuable artifacts. The Foundation's most ambitious project began taking shape 18 months after the Emerald discovery, a maritime museum and research center in Pelican Harbor, built on the site of the old marina, where Mike had first purchased the Second Wind. Jackson Miller, the harbor master who had witnessed Mike's transformation from desperate bidder to successful businessman, became deeply involved in the museum's planning, offering his extensive knowledge of local maritime history. Meanwhile, Carlos Mendoza's trial proceeded through the federal court system. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including not only the attempted theft of the Heart of Colombia, but decades of emerald smuggling, money laundering, and connections to organized crime. Hoffman kept Mike informed of developments, preparing him for his eventual testimony. When the day came for Mike to take the stand, he found himself face to face with Mendoza for the first time since the confrontation at the safe house. The former smuggler had aged visibly during his pretrial detention, the obsessive fire in his eyes replaced by a hollow resignation. As Mike testified about finding the emeralds and the subsequent threats against his family, Mendoza stared at him, not with hatred, but with something that looked disturbingly like recognition, as if he saw in Mike's determination a reflection of his own decades-long pursuit. The trial concluded with Mendoza's conviction on multiple federal charges, resulting in a 30-year sentence that effectively ensured he would spend the rest of his life in prison. The judge specifically cited the threats against Olivia as an aggravating factor in determining the sentence, noting that Mendoza had crossed a moral line by targeting a child. After the sentencing, Mike found himself standing outside the courthouse, with Rebecca both processing the formal end of the danger that had brought them back into reluctant alliance. "It's really over, isn't it?" Rebecca's voice held a mixture of relief and disbelief. "The legal part is," Mike agreed, "but I think the ripple effects will continue for a long time." Rebecca studied him for a moment. "You've changed, Mike. And I don't just mean the financial situation. There's something different about how you approach things now." Mike considered her observation. "When you're at rock bottom and suddenly have to make life or death decisions about millions of dollars and your daughter's safety, it forces you to figure out what actually matters. I spent years chasing financial security and missing what was important right in front of me." Rebecca nodded, a silent acknowledgement that this invite applied to both of them. "For Olivia's sake, I'm glad you found your second wind." The unexpected play on words hung between them, a small olive branch extended across the battlefield of their failed marriage. 2 years after the discovery of the emeralds, the Pelican Harbor Maritime Museum and Research Center opened to the public. The grand opening coincided with the Colombian National Museum's unveiling of a special exhibition featuring the restored Buenaventura collection. Through coordination between the two institutions, a live video connection was established, allowing visitors in Pelican Harbor to see the emeralds in their new home in Bogota. The museum opening attracted visitors from across New England, including maritime lawyers, treasure hunters, gemologists, and government officials involved in underwater archaeology. Reporters from national media covered the event, giving Mike another opportunity to share his story with a broader audience. During his opening remarks, Mike reflected on the journey that had brought him from that desperate auction bid to the podium where he now stood. 7 years ago, I bought a sinking houseboat because it was all I could afford, and I was determined to provide a home for my daughter. I never imagined that decision would lead to treasure discovery, federal investigations, and ultimately the opportunity to give back to my community in ways I had never dreamed possible. Mike's speech emphasized the importance of perseverance, integrity, and community support in overcoming life's challenges. The real treasure wasn't the emeralds I found hidden in my boat. The real treasure was learning that with determination, honesty, and the support of good people, it's possible to transform even the most desperate circumstances into opportunities for positive change. As he spoke, Mike noticed a family sitting in the back row, a tired-looking man in his 30s with two young children. The man's weathered hands and the distinctive smell of fish oil marked him as a fellow fisherman, one clearly facing hard times. Mike recognized in him the same desperate determination he had felt standing at that auction with his last 500 in his pocket. After the ceremony, Mike approached the fisherman, introducing himself without pretense. Ray Jenkins explained his situation haltingly. His boat needed expensive repairs, catches had been poor, and he was struggling to keep his family housed and fed. He had come to the museum opening hoping to find seasonal work as the charter business expanded. Instead of offering a job, Mike invited Ray to bring his family to the Second Wind Foundation office the next day. When they arrived, they were met not with charity, but with practical support, a low-interest loan for boat repairs, enrollment in a financial management program, and temporary housing assistance, while Ray stabilized his business. Most importantly, Mike connected Ray with the same network of support that had helped him navigate his own darkest hours. This is what the emeralds were really for, Mike explained to Olivia later as they watched Ray's family leave the foundation office with renewed hope. Not just to make our lives better, but to help others find their own second wind. Olivia, now 10 years old, had developed a remarkable maturity through her experiences. Her initial excitement about pirate treasure had evolved into a deeper understanding of value and responsibility. For her birthday, Mike had given her a digital camera, encouraging her interest in visual storytelling. She had begun documenting the foundation's work, creating a series of photographs that captured the transformation of families from crisis to stability. The Museum and Research Center quickly became a community anchor, offering educational programs for local schools and serving as a gathering place for maritime enthusiasts. The centerpiece exhibit featured a full-scale replica of the hidden compartment where Mike had discovered the emeralds, alongside a display on the ethics of treasure discovery and cultural heritage preservation. 3 years after the museum's opening, Mike received an invitation that brought his journey full circle. The National Museum of Colombia was planning a special 5th anniversary exhibition celebrating the return of the Buenaventura collection and wanted Mike and Olivia to attend as honored guests. After consulting with the FBI, who confirmed that all security concerns related to Mendoza's associates had been resolved, Mike decided to accept. The trip to Bogota marked their first international journey together. They were met at the airport by Elena Vasquez, the cultural attaché who had negotiated the emerald's return. The museum had arranged a private viewing of the exhibition before its public opening, allowing Mike and Olivia to see the fully restored collection in its proper cultural context. The Buenaventura emeralds were displayed in a state-of-the-art security case at the center of the exhibition hall. Each stone had been carefully cataloged and mounted to showcase its unique characteristics. Interpretive panels explain the collection's historical significance and its journey from the mines of Muzo to the museum, including its theft and eventual recovery. Mike's contribution was acknowledged in the exhibition materials, describing him as the American fisherman whose integrity ensured the collection's return to Colombia. A photograph showed Mike and Olivia standing beside a replica of the Second Wind, symbolizing the unlikely vessel that had carried the emeralds for so many years. The heart of Colombia occupied its own display case, the magnificent emerald now restored to its original gold setting. Beneath it, a small plaque bore a simple inscription, Discovered by Olivia Sullivan, age 8, whose innocent eyes saw treasure where others saw only secrets. Olivia stood transfixed before the emerald she had once claimed as pirate treasure, her expression reflecting the perfect blend of childlike wonder and growing maturity. The heart-shaped stone captured and refracted the museum lights, sending green sparks dancing across her face. "Do you ever wish we had kept it?" Olivia's question was tentative, curious, rather than regretful. Mike considered his answer carefully. Not for a second. Some treasures aren't meant to be owned. They belong to history, to culture, to the world. What we kept was far more valuable than any emerald. The following day, during a formal reception at the museum, Mike was surprised when Carlos Mendoza's son approached him. Unlike his father, who had devoted his life to recovering the emeralds through illegal means, Marco Mendoza had become a respected archaeologist specializing in pre-Columbian artifacts. He had traveled from his university position in Madrid specifically to meet the man who had found what his father had sought for decades. "My father sent me this letter before he died," Marco explained, handing Mike a carefully folded paper. "He passed away in prison last month. His final wish was that you should read his words." Mike unfolded the letter with trepidation, unsure what final message his former adversary might have sent. "Mr. Sullivan," Mendoza had written in a shaky hand, "for 30 years I believed the heart of Colombia would bring me the legacy my father failed to secure. I was wrong. Your legacy comes not from what you possess, but from what you choose to release. The emeralds were never truly mine, just as they were never truly yours. The difference between us is that you understood this truth while I refused to see it until everything was lost. My son has built an honorable life studying the artifacts I would have stolen. Perhaps in this way, some small good has come from my obsession after all." Mike handed the letter back to Marco, who shook his head. "He wanted you to keep it, perhaps as a reminder that even the darkest stories can find redemption in the next generation." Upon returning to Pelican Harbor, Mike found himself drawn once more to the second wind. The boat had been completely transformed, every trace of decay replaced with gleaming wood and polished brass. Yet the vessel's essence remained a sanctuary that had sheltered hopes and secrets through decades of neglect, waiting for someone who could see beyond its weathered exterior to the potential within. As the 5-year anniversary of the Emerald discovery approached, Mike received word that the museum's educational programs had reached a significant milestone. 10,000 local students had participated in its maritime history curriculum. To celebrate, the museum planned a special exhibition featuring student projects inspired by the Second Wind story. Olivia, now 13, had created the centerpiece of the exhibition, a documentary film chronicling her father's journey from struggling fisherman to community benefactor. She had interviewed everyone connected to the Emerald discovery, from Tony Rodriguez and Jackson Miller to Elizabeth Hoffman and even agents Clark and Diaz, who provided carefully vetted insights into the investigation. The premiere screening was scheduled for the exact date 5 years earlier, when Mike had stood at the marina auction with his last $500. The symmetry wasn't lost on him as he sat in the darkened museum theater, watching his daughter's film unfold before an audience of community members who had witnessed his transformation firsthand. The documentary captured not just the dramatic elements of the Emerald discovery, but the deeper story of personal redemption and community connection. Through Olivia's lens, Mike saw himself with new clarity, not as a lucky treasure finder, but as a man who had made difficult choices with integrity when faced with extraordinary circumstances. Near the end of the film, Tony Rodriguez appeared on screen, his weathered face filling the frame. "When Mike first showed me that boat, I thought he'd lost his mind. The old Sullivan would have cut his losses and walked away. But something changed in him when he became determined to make a home for Olivia. He stopped accepting defeat. That's why he succeeded where others would have failed." As the credits rolled and the lights came up, Mike found himself surrounded by the community that had witnessed his journey, from the fishermen who had once mocked his floating coffin to the families who had benefited from the Second Wind Foundation. Rebecca stood to one side, a small smile acknowledging how far they had both come from the bitterness of their divorce. Following the screening, Mike and Olivia walked down to the harbor where the Second Wind was moored. The evening air carried the familiar sense of salt water and creosote-treated pilings, the soundtrack of waves lapping against hulls creating a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "Dad, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't bought this boat?" Olivia leaned against the railing, her expression thoughtful beyond her 13 years. Mike considered the question looking out over the harbor, where fishing boats were returning with their day's catch. Every significant turning point in his life seemed connected to this body of water, from his earliest days as a struggling fisherman to his current role as a community leader and conservationist. "I think the treasures we're meant to find have a way of finding us," Mike replied finally. "But they rarely look like what we expect, and they never come without challenges." The boat wasn't the treasure, it was just the vessel that carried it. The real discovery was understanding what truly matters. As darkness fell over Pelican Harbor, lights came on aboard the boats and along the shore, creating a constellation of human presence against the gathering night. Mike and Olivia remained on deck, sharing comfortable silence as they had so many times before. The second wind rocked gently at its moorings, secure and purposeful, much like the man who had once risked everything to claim it. In the distance, a small fishing boat limped toward the harbor, Ray Jenkins returning from a day on the water. Mike recognized the distinctive silhouette, noting that the vessel moved more confidently now, its engine running smoother after the repairs the foundation had helped finance. Ray's two children waited on the dock, much as Olivia had once waited for Mike's return. The sight completed a circle that had begun with a desperate bid at a marina auction 5 years earlier. Some might say that Mike had sacrificed a fortune by returning the emeralds to Colombia. But standing on the deck of the second wind with his daughter beside him, looking out over the community he had helped to strengthen, Mike knew he had received something far more valuable, in exchange not just financial security, but purpose, respect, and the profound satisfaction of knowing he had made the right choices when it mattered most. The harbor's most ridiculed resident had indeed become one of its most respected citizens, not because of the treasure he had found, but because of what that discovery had revealed about his character. In the end, the emeralds had been merely stones, beautiful and valuable, but temporary custodians in his life. The legacy Mike had built would endure long after the memory of the Buenaventura collection had faded, a testament to the principle that our greatest treasures are not what we keep, but what we choose to give back to the world.